Hello to everyone, and thank you for coming here to the presentation of Alessandro Mocellin, who will present us today the two twin histories of Venetia and Croatia in the 19th and 20th century. And I hope you enjoy the lecture. There are refreshments served there after that, and I took the liberty of taking little souvenir flags on the back, so feel free to take one or several of them if you like them. And this is it. Alessandro is the president of the Accademia della Buona Creanza, dell'Accademia della Lingua Veneta. So he's an expert on the field to present us recent history and similarities. Thank you, Alessandro.
Thank you, thank you. Well, I have to thank everybody for being here today. I'm so pleased to be presenting this experiment, we can say. Because, of course, if we speak about what do they have in common, Venetia and Croatia, the first thing that comes to mind, of course, is the Venetian period of Istria and Dalmatia. But that is not the center of this presentation. It was too easy, actually, and it is well delved by historians. I wanted to present something which has to do more to framing these two histories and the contact, linguistic and historical, in a kind of a different way. First of all, for example, I have developed I'm graduated in law first, so there I developed a taste for very precise terminology. And through time, especially speaking in English, because in Italian, for example, there is a big difference between Veneto and Veneziano. You may know if you know it in the Italian language. But in English, these two terms are the same, Venetian and Venetian. But they are referring to two different things. Are they the same thing? So, is Venetia Venice or is Venetia Veneto? You know, Veneto is a region of Italy, we will see it nowadays. Venice, you know, the city. But I written no Venice and no Veneto. So, what is Venetia? What is it? Because, obviously, the term Venetian comes from Venetia. So we will have to know what Venetia means terminologically. It's not a word, it's a term, which is very different also philosophically. A word can be ambiguous, it could also be part of poems, while in science, you'll have to be non-ambiguous. So, what is Venetia? First of all, that will be the very part of this presentation, and then we'll move to this comparison and contrast between the experiences, mainly historical ones, but also about language, because there's something unexpected that is very, very interesting, to my opinion, because somehow these two, I can say the term countries, historically, both, they have something in common as I use a German philosophical term, Weltanschauung, the way they see and they approach the world. Why? Because these two territories, these two countries, Croatia in its broad extent, in today's extent we can say, and also Venetia, they are polycentric. They are not like France, who is so monolithic to be immediately, how can I say, just Paris and what is around Paris. That is France. That is the idea of France. And unfortunately, I can say that as an Italian citizen, Italy was built up in that exact way. So Italy was built up in a French manner. That is also one thing. Almost all the intellectuals of the 19th century were in favor of the Italian unification, but none of them was in favor of the single way of unificating Italy that actually happened. So this is one thing. Everybody thought about a polycentric Italy, a confederation of states, or anyway a republic. And of course, in the case of Venice, it was clearly the way we perceived the world since centuries. because Venice has never had a king or a prince. Not only Venice, but the Venetian history, we will see that we have to go very back at the beginning of the ancient history to talk about this Venetia, and that is interesting. And so I say, let's start from the beginning. And if you talk about Venetia, and you stop to the birth of Venice, you'll have, well, Venice was legendarily founded on the 5th of April of March, so this month, 421, so in the 5th century, okay? Nobody was there to film the situation, of course, we don't know the exact date. There was no exact date, and maybe the area was inhabited before. But if we start talking about Venetia, before, just stopping to Venice, well, Venice was born 1,600 years ago. But the Venetian history, it's twice as long. So Venice was born in the middle of the 3 millennia of Venetian history. We will see what this means in a minute, in a couple of minutes. Okay. So, the introduction, then what we are going to do, find opportunities or needs to categorize this comparison, especially about the language, because there is something very interesting which happened not because of contact, but because of common vision, even unconscious one. And that is, I think, even more interesting than contact itself, because the contact of languages and cultures is rather delved in academic researches. This is a little bit more, it's broader, I think. So, it's important, first of all, to watch to geography, because, you know, in the French vision of the Les Annales, like Marc Bloch, Brodel, okay, they say that, of course, history happens, but geography is the mother of history, because geography is there, okay? So, it's not something about civilizations itself that this area here is the most northern part of the Mediterranean Sea. And as you do know, before having trains and airplanes, rather recent means of transportation, well, the only way to move fast with goods was on water. And clearly, this is kind of a geographical obligation here, through centuries and millennia, that commerce would come from the center of Europe to Africa, and especially this, of course, Asia, and here through, you know, the Silk Road in the past, and also now, actually, that this area is a hub. So, well before Venice, there were other cities here in the north of the Adriatic Sea, like the city of Adria, which gives the name to the Adriatic. And where is it now? It is here, near the Po River. It is the most southern province, in the southern province of the Veneto region today. It's a small city, it's not even on the sea now, because coasts moved, okay? But the name Adriatic comes from that city. And there were other cities, and today, for example, Trieste is more that city, that hub city, than Venice. But that is a decision, not of course of Venice, but of Italy, to move, to use Trieste more than Venice. Here, well, almost the same thing. You see that this actually, it's more like a sea than more like a lake than a sea. It is very tight here, and so it is geography giving us the chance to see this area. You see, Adria is here now. Okay, this is the Veneto region. You see rivers here. And these rivers, maybe you know Venice was, of course, developed on commerce. Yes, through the seas, through the Mediterranean, through the Adriatic, but the importance of Venice was bigger than through time. It became bigger than Genoa, which is on the other side of Italy, because Genoa, just behind the city, has mountains, has the Apennines, while Venice has a big and broad mainland, which is a plain, and with these rivers, which were employed to move goods, without having to take them off the ships to carts. Okay, so geography once again. Did you know that here in this area they found out quite recently, archaeology found out some Roman villas, and they are actually in the lagoon. So we know that 500 years before the founding of Venice, inside the lagoon, in the middle of nothing, in the middle of water, it's not true. Well, before, during the Roman Empire, there were villas built in areas that now are under the level of water. So there's something before. There's something before, not only for Venice, you see, this is a map of the Venetian area, and most interesting here in this moment is also to see that Istria was considered by the Romans too as part of this area. Culturally, linguistically, you see Venice is not here, but this area, 200 years ago, was called Venetia. Why was it called so? Because there was Venice? No, there was no Venice. You see, it would be here. It's not here. And where is it? Why is it that the Romans, that Augustus would call, also Caesar before, would call this area Venetia, and also the Greeks would call it Venetica, which means Venetia. Why? Because it was the Veneti area. So the term Venetia, Venice, the city, comes from the term, the toponym of the region Venetia, and the toponym Venetia comes from an ethnonym, so a name of a population, which is Veneti, which is the name that we nowadays employ for the people who inhabit the Veneto region. So 2,000 years ago, we had a Veneti population which was there, and they were allied with the Romans. They have the same name that we now give to the population inhabiting Veneto. Then what happened? Well, it happened that, just staying in these 2,000 years, it happened that the invasions, what gave birth to the so-called Middle Ages. This is, for example, the Lombard invasion. And what happened is that this area, which was Venetia, it just lost. It was lost by the Eastern Roman Empire, of course, because the Western already collapsed. When in 568, the king of the Longobards entered from Cividale, from here. He invaded the whole North Italy except for the coast. That's why the big Venetia shrinked in extension, and the name Venetia, the area of the Veneti, shrinked to the area that we nowadays know as Venice, of the Venetian lagoon. That's why Venice takes the name from the region, because it was eroded by the invasion. And the Greeks kept, also, for example, Constantine VII, Porphyrogenitus, who wrote also about the Croats. He wrote about the area, and he thought, and he explained that there were here ancient Veneti population, but that now the empire holded in that moment control only of the lagoon, and that's where Venice then was born. Interestingly, you know, year 800, Charlemagne builds up the empire, the sacred Roman Empire. And he had defeated, some 25 years before, he had defeated the Longobards, and so he conquered everything until Rome, except for Venice. He tried to, his son tried to, he couldn't, he was not successful, but 1,000 years, 200 years later, 200 years later, year 1000, when the Ottoni, I don't know how to say it in English, the Ottoni, the emperors, the German emperors, 962, Ottone I di Sassonia, Otton, okay, Otton, so you okay, perfect. He rebuilt up the empire, and he divided his empire in marques and counties. Well, there was the Marquisate, or the Marquis of Verona, and you see, it has the same dimension that Venetia had before. So there's something there in time, okay? And Verona, of course, is part of the Veneto area today. This year is the year of Dante Alighieri's beginning of the Divina Commedia, just to contextualize also in literature, no? This year is, so when Dante is exiliated from Florence, where does he go? He goes around, and he also goes to Verona, for example. And he would have seen the area this way, with the cities having a territory around, and so very fragmented, we would say. Still, Venice was there. And you know that Dante died coming back from Venice to Ravenna. He was there for the Da Polenta here, for the Da Polenta Signoria. Well, since when we speak about Venetian language, many people say, well, Venetian dialect. Of course, you've heard or read something about that. It is quite often considered a dialect. It is not a dialect as to linguistics, not at all. It is not a dialect also as to social linguistics, because it was the language used by a republic, which lasted 1,000 and more years. So Venetian is not a dialect. No, it's not a particular way to pronounce Italian. No. We will see a couple of examples in the second part of the presentation. But this is how Dante saw Italy linguistically. Okay? He said in the De Vulgare Eloquentia that in Italy there were ad minus 14, so at least 14 languages. One of them, he says, is that of the Marchia Trivisiana, we wrote it here, Marchia Trivisiana cum Venetis. And Marchia Trivisiana is the same big thing we've seen before, the Marchesato of Verona. Now it changes the name to another city, Treviso, okay? And Venice, he says they speak the same language, even though they are politically two different, very different entities, okay? And I have a question for you, because I usually like to how can I say, to make dynamics also in the lectures and class. I'm a teacher at school, actually, first of all. Yeah. But this is the question. If Dante is said to be the father to the Italian language, okay, and he sees these 14 languages in Italy in his same period, and he writes it down, the question is the following. Where is the Italian language here? It doesn't exist. The Italian language will rise through centuries. It is an intellectual language. It was never spoken, used normally by the population. It is kind of a sequel of the Tuscan language. In particular, the Florentine language, a Florentine language, dialect of the Tuscan language, but not that spoken by normal people, that of intellectuals, and not that of any century you would pick up. just that of the 14th century. That's Dante, Alighieri, Giovanni Boccaccio, and Francesco Petrarca, the three corone, okay? But this language is I have to say it was built up as an artificial language, clearly, because people in Veneto area or in Sicily, they would speak, also the intellectuals, the same intellectuals who were able to write in the Tuscan language. It was called Tuscan till the 18th century. They would be able to write Tuscan, and the Tuscan of the 14th century, that of the literary Tuscan, but they would speak their own language. If somebody of you is acquainted with Italian literature, Alessandro Manzoni wrote Promessi Sposi, well, he wouldn't speak Tuscan at home. And that's why he had to rewrite it again. After having written it for the first time, 1827, he had to write it again, and it took 13 years to rephrase in a more Tuscan way, in a proper Tuscan way, after having been to Florence. He says to rinse the clothes in the Arno River. That's the river going through the river going through Florence. So, is it a mystery that in Veneto they speak Venetian? No, Dante did know that 700 years ago, okay? And that in Sicily they speak Sicilian. Well, Dante did know that too, okay? Are these languages? Yes, because they are at the same level as French, as Catalan, as Portuguese, as Romanian. They are all siblings, one to each other, and all children of the Latin language. So, genealogically, they are all languages, because everyone stems from Latin directly. None of these languages is a photocopy, a wrong photocopy or a scrambled photocopy of another. They are all directly spinning from that. Again, about history, here you see in year 1500, more or less, the broadest expansion in the Italian area. First of all, the most interesting thing is to compare these two. You have seen both of them. Can you move this 500 years ago on this 2,000 years ago and see that there's something there? Okay? They 1.5 millennium in between, but there's something. It's a social-political entity, a geo-social-political entity. There's something there. This, maybe the colors are not perfect, but this is just geography. Again, I like to do this. Sorry for scrambling things around. This is this area. You may see the color. This is the basin of the Po River, the longest river in Italy. There's Milan is here, Turin is here, here's the Garda River. But you see here, this is the basin of the Venetian rivers. Adige, Brenta, Piave, Livenza, Tagliamento, Isonzo, okay? The Venetian rivers have nothing in common with the Po River. So when in Italy they say the north of Italy is against the south of Italy, well, there's no north. There's two of them. Very different ones. I never thought about this, but it came out now, so it's also interesting. Can we compare this to, do you see from, yeah, okay. I will change the colors so to be sure. Just take this in mind, keep this in mind, and okay, and compare it with this. What did I say before? This is Dante again. You see the Po River here. Can you see it? It is there. And here we have three languages. This would be Istriotto, this would be Friulian, and this would be Venetian. Did I say that the Venetian area is a polycentric one? It is. Because we are it's normal to have languages in contact in our experience, okay? Which is not the same for the Lombards and, okay. And this is Italy, geographically. It's a peninsula, right? If you would have asked to Caesar, where is Italy? He would have said, this is Italy. Okay? When he crossed the Rubicon, and it was to catch, you know, the Senate in arms, which was forbidden, of course, he came out from Gallia, and he arrived here. And crossing the river, it means to enter Italy. Afterwards, it was Augustus who said, well, Italy arrives also to the Alps and to Venetia and Istria. So we can read things through time. Again, the Venetian Empire, because especially the English historians use this term, empire. And everything you see in red is a territory that has been part of the Venetian Republic through time. It's from here, from near Milan, you can see, to Cyprus, it's 2,600 kilometers. So it's double the extension of Italy. But in the 13th century, 13, 14, well, Cyprus it was in the late 15th century and early 16th century. So it was, all these areas are somehow involved. Nowadays they are 8 states are somehow interested in some Venetian historical heritage. This is also important, and linguistically too. These people are famous Venetians you may have heard or read were Italians. Well, okay, they were also Europeans, but it's not the same thing. Because if you think they were Italians, you may have kind of an analogy that they spoke Italian. But of course, they couldn't speak Italian. They would write Italian, maybe, and we would call it Tuscan, okay? But all these people, they were Venetians, and they spoke Venetian. Even lately, like, where is he? Canova, here. This is one of the examples of statues by Canova, the famous sculptor. And he would speak Venetian also where he was in Rome. So that is interesting too. To close up this introduction and to move to the real core of this presentation, this is a synchronic map of 300 years of Venetian civilization. We use this term. So this in green is the Venetia and Istria for the Romans. Green field, okay? This blue broader line is the maximum extension of the Venetian Republic in the mainland, so 1500. This, this light blue, it became green here, this one is the Veneto that entered in Italy. We will briefly say this too in the last part. And today's Veneto is the red line here. These are the borders of today's Veneto region. These orange stripes here, they are where the Venetian language is spoken. Okay? So up until now, this amounts to 2,000 years. But if we go to the dots and triangles here, these are the settlings of the ancient Veneti population, and they date back to the 10th, 9th, 8th century BC. And they are archaeologically proven. This ancient Veneti had their own language, which was not Latin, their own alphabet, which was not Latin alphabet, and they were there possibly before the Romans were in Rome. Okay? Was the Venetia conquered by the Romans? No, they were allied. And they defeated the Celts together. That was also another thing to know. The Venetian language. So, Venetian, is it a Neo-Latin language? Yes, of course it is. It is now spoken in kind of this area. Okay. Of course it is spoken, there are some residuals, especially lexicon in other areas, but they are not productive communities, unfortunately, any longer. Okay? There are people speaking Venetian also in Turin, in Milan, in Genoa because of immigration after the Second World War, internal immigration in Italy. But they're not productive communities. They are not generating new speakers, okay? While these areas are still generating new speakers, okay? At least passive competence. How many people speak Veneto? Maybe this is too much, 7 million people, 6 million people, okay? Not only here, but in 5 countries, as you maybe saw already, but it's just 3 here. Where are the other 2 countries? Do you know, maybe just by chance you heard something that there's some vanity that Venetian is spoken elsewhere in the world and not in Europe? Have you ever heard something about that? Possibly? No? Nobody? Okay, wonderful. It was just asking. Well, first of all, in Brazil, incredibly, if you know the names of the cities of Veneto, Bassano, Vicenza, Treviso, Padova, Verona, Belluno, Venezia, you will find many of them renamed here. Nova Bassano, Nova Vicenza, Nova Treviso, of course Nova means new. There are 4 new Venices in Brazil. Why is it so? Because just after the Italian unification, which came up without Veneto, we will see it, Veneto was not part of the proclaimed unified Italy. 17th of March, so yesterday, 1861, Veneto was not part of that. It was part of the Austrian Empire, as Croatia was in the same period, but we will see it now. And after just 9 years after the annexation to Italy, the massive emigration of Veneti began. So somebody said the first consequence of the arrival of the Italians was the departure of the Veneti from the Veneto. That is unfortunately true, because we are not talking about hundreds of people, but hundreds of thousands of people. In Brazil, there are, according to Brazilian statistics, 30 million people who are descendants of at least one grandfather who is from Italy. Half of them is from Veneto and Friuli together. Okay? So, that's why you can speak Venetian. Just to provide an example, this, which is a grammar of a short grammar of the Venetian, a pocket grammar of the Venetian language, this was produced in Brazil with the university, with the Universidade Federal de Santa Maria. Of course, they do speak Portuguese there, but this was the first course of Venetian language held at the university, and it was held in Brazil. You wouldn't expect that from a minority language, not even recognized by Italy, but taught in schools in Brazil. There's something that is not correct, probably in Italy, if in Italy it is considered a dialect of Italian, which is not. And in Brazil it is used and taught in schools. We have to pose ourselves our questions, because science is this, questions. Then answers may come and politics may interfere, but questions are still free to ask. This is my opinion at least. Okay, even in Mexico, there's near Mexico City, on the plain, Mexico plain, there's La Puebla, and behind that city, there are 3,000 people from Veneto, descendants of Veneti emigrated in the late 19th century. Well, behind there is a small hill, and they gave to that hill the name of the mountain, the highest mountain you can see from the Venetian plain, which is Monte Grappa. If you ever, it is more famous for the First World War, actually, if you studied that period. And they gave that name, the name of amount which is between Treviso and Vicenza, you can find the same Monte Grappa here, another here, and another here. Interesting. Okay. Let's move towards the comparison. First of all, we are here, right? Well, we are here, but we are trying to see what's in common here. Well, of course, the red ones are the languages, the Germanic languages, you can tell. The green ones are the Romance languages, Neo-Latin languages coming from Latin. These, the blue ones, are the Slavic languages. We've got Albanian and Kosovar here, Greek, the Baltic languages, and the non-Indo-European languages. Okay? Well, the big three families, of course, are Germanic, Neo-Latin, and Slavic. But this area is where they all meet. The only area where these three big opportunities of relative, I don't know, does it exist as a term? Of being related, okay, relatedness, but also relativeness. You understand what I mean? Maybe it's a neologism, okay? Well, this area is the area where these languages, geographically and historically, are connected. And it is interesting because these people in this area somehow will have to find innate, not innate, well, culture is the adaptation of man to the context. So culturally, in these cultures, you may expect, if you're a person, an alien coming from Mars, you would come here and say, well, if we have to try to find ways to coexist, maybe also to litigate, because also that is part of coexistence, and everybody who's married knows that, okay? You would come here in this area to see how, through time, they developed ways to stay together, to coexist, and to also prosper through this coexistence and this exchange. Venetian, of course, is this. This is not necessary. Okay, just a little thing, I promised you, to let you have a taste of why Venetian is a language different from Italian. How many people of you here speak Italian? Or Spanish? Or Portuguese? Okay, just a little bit. Okay, I will provide examples, and we're not interrogating today. Well, in English, if I produce a word saying arrives tomorrow, a phrase, a sentence saying arrives tomorrow, it's non-grammatical. It's wrong. You have to say which is the subject. Okay? So you have to say he arrives tomorrow. These are translations in other languages. You see the same is in French. Il arrive demain, kommt morgen. And in Venetian, we have the same thing. It is mandatory to have the subject. This is not in Italian. If you ask in Italian, quando arriva Giovanni, the answer would be arriva domani, without saying lui or egli arriva domani. It's not necessary. It's completely an option. You can use it, express it, the subject, or you can keep it under the bench, okay? While in Venetian it is mandatory, as in these other languages. 2 Germanic languages and 2 Neo-Latin languages. I provided examples here. Why is it so? When I ask this thing to people speaking English, I can ask you, because of course you do speak English or at least understand, why is it that in English you have to express the subject? Boo. Because they are funny people? Why is it so? There's a linguistic reason. And the linguistic reason is that to ask questions, you have to do the interrogative inversion. If you are missing one of the 2 things, you cannot invert. That's why you need 2. Otherwise, you cannot ask questions in these languages. And that's why the you are crazy expression in English would go as an interrogative form, are you crazy? Switching subject and and verb. The same is in German. Du bist verrückt. Bist du verrückt? You wouldn't even need the question mark because the structure, the syntax of the language demonstrates that that is a question. And how many questions do we employ when we meet, like at the market? How are you? What is your child studying now? Okay? How's the weather today? These things. So questions are very a pillar of our linguistic habits, use. Tu es fou, es-tu fou? And in Venetian we will have the same thing. Te sei matto, si tomato. Okay. So, Venetian and French have this German characteristic. This in Italian is completely impossible, and also in Spanish. Have you ever read some questions in Spanish? They have that inverted question mark at the beginning. Have you ever wondered why they use it? Now maybe you know. Because if you do not employ that inverted question mark at the beginning of a question, you do not know how to pose intonation to have a question at the very end, which could be a long sentence. Well, in Venetian, in French, in English, and in German, you don't need it, because you will immediately see that there's inversion and use the appropriate intonation to ask questions. Again, in Italian, this is completely impossible. So, Venetian is not a dialect of Italian. Again, not only for genealogically, we've seen before, but also typologically. Its characteristics, its features, linguistic, are different, rather different from Italian, in an important thing like syntax. Okay, let's start the comparison. So we arrived to the core of the presentation. Well, maybe you would think that we could talk about this area, so the contact, languages in contact. In linguistics, in social linguistics in particular, one of the fields is the study of languages in contact. The parts of a language, phonetics, lexicon, morphology, syntax, well, the shallower ones are these, sounds and lexicon. They are easily exchanged. We all know what sushi is, sashimi, nigiri, okay? We know that. This doesn't mean we are able to build the sentences in Japanese. So the same is for Venetian words that usually through Istria and Dalmatia remain even in Croatian. But this has been studied and delved, for example, by Miotto. And so I'm not going to speak about this because maybe somebody of you expected that. And since I'm not proficient enough in Croatian to enter solidly the field, I prefer to say that this is languages in contact and to move to something that, of course, I can be more helpful on. Okay? Do you agree with that? Okay? Here is the center of what I know. Maybe you didn't know, oh gosh, this went up. Okay, well, no problem. Maybe you never heard this term, Ausbauisation, which is German with a nominal, with a suffix in English. Okay, there's a difference in social linguistics between Abstand and Ausbau languages. Which is this difference? An Ausbau language is a built-up language, like French, like Italian. Usually because there's a long history of one state or one academy, like the La Real Academia Española or l'Académie Française, who through centuries and with public power somehow worked the language through centuries to a standard that is widely accepted. This is not the case, of course, of Venetian, but somehow it is not fully the case also for Croatian, which has a more recent standardization process, okay, dating back to the first half of the 19th century, okay. In the case of Venetian, it dates back to 8 years ago. Okay, so we are far more recent, okay? But what is interesting is that comparing these two processes of creation of an Ausbau language. So all the languages which are fully built up have been built up by somebody intentionally. Okay? Every language was spontaneous, and then there's an intentional creation of a standard of writing and a selection maybe of a standard of pronouncing too. Okay? In French, there is one way to write and one way to pronounce. Okay? So that's why the French are very, very famous about not understanding a simple des mains, yeah, it's different. What is that? Maybe if you've been in France and tried to speak French, you had this awkward sensation that they refused your pronunciation. Okay? In Italian, there's a written standard, but not a pronounced standard. It exists only in theater. And you go around, they can speak in different variety, different pronunciations of the language. Okay? But there is one written, one only possible way to write, hypothetically. Now, if we move to a comparison, well, this I said, the standardization is more recent than French, than German, than Italian. But what is interesting, they have both an antecedent with something which is nowadays somewhere else. So, of course, there is the Serbo-Croatian concept, linguistically, it is existing. But there was also the Lombard-Venetian, koje, which is very similar. Now, Lombard is rather similar, rather different from Venetian, and it took some centuries to arrive at that, but there was a time in history where the two languages were almost the same one. Okay? So it was interesting just to pose on the table. What is even more interesting is a standardization which includes the varieties somehow, which acknowledges that there are varieties and they are part of the language and they can coexist with the standard. And it is the same thing without actually knowing that you did the same thing, okay, with Croatian, that the same thing was made with Croatian. That has been done with Venetian, taking different varieties and saying they can all be used. They have kind of their standard, but there is a standard above, which is the standard. So for Venetian, with this study, 2016, which was made with the University of Frankfurt am Main, so in Germany, we produced this comparison of Venetian with 6 other Neo-Latin languages, so French, Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, Catalan, and Romanian, and developed the multi-standard Venetian theory. So there's one macro standard and several other standards. So you can write in Venetian, which is the variety of Venice. You can write in Paduan, which is the variety of Padua. Okay? But there's also the variety, which is the standard, based on the central area of Veneto. That would be this. I don't know if you see it. The blue here. Can you see it also from that? Okay. Another interesting thing, this is covered here, unfortunately. I don't know why. Yeah, because it was in Google presentations, and then I moved to LibreOffice, okay, for connection things. Okay, another very interesting thing that is completely not French, okay, or not Spanish, is that the standard was developed not based on that of on the variety of the capital. Through time, even though hypothetically it was the most important, the standard was developed differently. So in a polycentric vision, this is something that in France they would have never done. There's Paris and nothing else, okay? This is the vision. The same in England. You know that in English, if you do not speak properly, you are not even a citizen. And the term citizen comes from city, of course. We have to recall this. Another important thing, I think I should move this. If I will go out from the just a moment to move this away, otherwise, okay. Bon. The descriptive, a second. Can you read here, presentación? No? Well, those are in the first line. Tacca dalla prima means begin from the first one. But we move to this. Sorry, 1 second. I'm finishing. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Presentation. Okay. So, interestingly, we have a descriptive orthography. So the sounds are rather clearly descripted. And the same is in Venetian. And it is typical of the languages which have been standardized recently. Some historical trajectories. Well, this is what happened with Napoleon, just taking the 19th and 20th century. Napoleon, you know, the Republic of Venice was conquered, even though it was neutral. So Napoleon did the same as Hitler did with Belgium. But after the war, the Napoleonic Wars, the Republic of Venice was not restored in the Restoration Congress of Vienna. That is also one thing. And in that way, after the creation of the Illyrian provinces, then everything moved towards an Austrian Empire, where the Veneto region, this is the Austrian Empire out of the Congress of Vienna. You see here there's Lombardy and Venetia. It is the kingdom of Lombardy and Venetia. Again, the term Venetia comes back, and again Lombardy and Venetia are together. You see? So there is some interesting convergence on this. This was the Veneto here during the period 1815, oh, it went down, till 1866, well, 59 for Lombardy. So this was the Veneto. Today the Veneto is without Friuli, because Friuli is Friuli Venezia Giulia, so it was taken away and given a new name of region with Gorizia Trieste. Okay. Oh, here. This is unified Italy. I don't know if you've ever seen this kind of map, this exact way. Well, this is the proclaimed Italy, unified Italy, in 1861. So when did Veneto, this area, come to be part of the Italian reign, the reign of Italy, under the Savoia? Well, just 5 years afterwards. So the first war that was done by Italy as a kingdom to conquer something was to conquer Veneto, okay, away from the Austrian Empire. I took this image, this map. This is one of the crossroads of history, I called it like this. It is taken from a public ministry website about the 150 years of celebration of Italian unification. So 1861 plus 150, 2011, okay? There was this big celebration, and one of the explanations in this website is about the entrance of the Veneto, the entry of the Veneto area, which was this, in Italy in 1866. What is interesting to know that this, there are several mistakes in this ministerial website. First mistake, this you may know more easily. Here they write that this was the Austro-Hungaric Empire. You can see from Italian here. But there was no Austro-Hungaric Empire in 1866 because the Ausgleich came the following year, 1867. First mistake. Second mistake, the Veneto area did not enter Italy on the 22nd of October. But why did they use that date? Because it was a day of a referendum. Veneto area in 1866, the Veneto, Venetia, it was called still La Venezia in that period, entered Italy with a referendum. Did you know about that? It was a referendum. I think the first one where all the population, only, of course, that period, only men could vote, but all of the population could vote on deciding to enter or not enter Italy, and that is very interesting. And this is what it was, a plebiscite, a referendum, which was in the Peace Treaty of Vienna. So it was an obligation posed on Italy to accept the Veneto only if the Veneti agreed with that. It is very strange in this period. I mean, it's Bismarck's period. So the Machtpolitik, it's very a different temperature, okay? In this case, what is interesting is that Italy did not want to ask the Veneti their opinion. But the Austria and France said, well, Italy, you fought a war against Austria to conquer the Veneto. You had 2 battles and you lost both of them. What do you want? More than receiving a territory just because you were allied with the Prussians. Okay? And so they imposed this referendum. I do not want to tell you why the 99.98% of the population said yes. Not even Hitler was able to reach this level of agreement in a plebiscite. There were some things about voting not really clear, of course, and in some places more people than the voters voted yes. So there is something to revise about that. But still, it is interesting because the Veneto area, which was part of Austria during the war, Austria gave it to France. Why France? Because it was like a third party, like a protector. So Austria gave it to France, and France, on the 19th of October, gave Veneto to 3 representatives of the Veneti population. And Italy, well, Veneto entered Italy on the 4th of November. So, I have a question for you. What happened, what was Veneto in the period from the 19th of October to the 4th of November? In the 4th of November, it enters Italy. So, if it enters on the 4th, it was not in before. Do you agree on that? So, on the 4th of November, Italy finally gains Veneto. But on the 19th of October, 16 days before, Veneto was not Austrian, was not French, and was not Italian for 16 days. What was it? Formally, it was an independent state which voted to adhere to the Italian kingdom. But the occupation armies arrived before, and everything was made go in different ways. Maybe one day we can talk about this, which is, since I particularly studied this from the legal point of view, since I'm graduated in international and constitutional law, it was very, my first degree was that. So it was very interesting. Other trajectories, well, you see, this is the Austro-Hungarian Empire. What could have happened? Well, Veneto could have remained with Austria, could have become again an independent territory. Another crossroad. Well, you know that Italy was allied with Austria and Germany in the First World War, before the First World War, and it denounced, this is the correct term, the alliance to go with France, Great Britain, and Russia. So what happened? Well, it could have happened that the war was not here, but maybe it could have been in Piedmont, in Turin. But of course, since the Savoia were the king's ear in Turin for centuries, they didn't want to destroy Piemonte. It was their homeland. So it was better to destroy Veneto with a war against Austria, the Allied, till maybe 2 years before, okay? So this is another turning point of history. What would have happened if Italy kept its alliance, its triennial alliance with Austria, and not change her mind so easily? And this, I want to just display it. with nothing. So you can, I'm quite sure that, not sure, confident that you've never seen something like this. What is this? Any guess? Maybe you can tell from the flags. Of course this is Italy. Of course this is not a unified Italy. What is this? You see here, well, before I look into the flags, maybe we're finishing here. This is the Veneto area. You see Milan is here. It's still, again, it is similar to that of the ancient Veneti, to that of the expansion of Venice, but this is 1943. South Südtirol to Austria, this Piedmont and Milan and Liguria to the French, Sicily and Sardinia to the English, southern Italy to the Greek, the Americans from Bologna to Naples, and here, you know that flag, okay? So what is this? This is the proposal of Churchill in the Tehran conference, the first Big Three conference. In the same conference, they established the United Nations. So it was not, it was a conference with Joseph Stalin and with Churchill and Roosevelt. So the Big Three, the first one, and the English put on the table, since Italy had an armistice with the United States, and said, and the English, and said, we are going to surrender. On the 3rd of September, this happened, and so Italy denounced the alliance with the Germans and allied with the Allied. And so what did the English do? Said, well, since Italy surrendered, this is going to be the new subdivision of Italy, as Germany will be divided in 4 parts. You know that Germany was initially divided in 4 parts, one to the Soviets, which will become the DDR, and the other 3 parts that were joined together with Bonn as a capital. And so this part, Venetia, was assigned to Yugoslavia. But this was not accepted, especially by Stalin. Okay? And so this was a turning point. It could have been, I don't know, did you know about this or ever heard about this? It could have been that Veneto became part of Yugoslavia. It was, sometimes things just happen in one way or the other. Thank you. I don't know if you have some questions or okay.
Thank you, Alessandro. It was very interesting. Does anyone have any questions, perhaps, to our guest lecturer? Oh.
To break the ice.
Thank you. So as you know, I'm from Spalato, so I grew up speaking the Dalmatian variety of Veneto. Would you agree with me that actually Veneto, the language of the Serenissima, should be treated as an autochthone language of today's Croatia?
Well, we will have to ask ourselves what autochthonous means, if autochthonous as of date of expiry or not. Because is it autochthonous? They asked me the same thing in Brazil. Is Venetian in Brazil, Veneto Brasileiro, is it autochthonous to Brazil? Which language? I answer with another question. Is Italian, Tuscan, autochthonous to Veneto? No. Or yes? Probably.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
But I would say that it's a different situation with Istria, Dalmatia.
Yeah, because before there was what we should study, not from a socio-political point of view, but from a typological and genealogical point of view, because these are the three axes to study and analyze languages. Genealogy of language, where does it come from? Typology, how is it the language as to phonetics, lexicon, you remember the four pillars, the temple model of the language. And social-linguistically, how is it perceived by people? Is it perceived to be a language? In these cases, I think that the winner taking all is the social political one. If people who speak it perceive it as autochthonous, it will become autochthonous. It's like a self-predicting truth, okay? If people think a language is a dialect, they will kill it, and it will die. It will become a dialect, and it is a process in social linguistics it's a process of dialectification, which is part of the paradigm of inferiorization of a language, okay? It could be killed, but only in places where monolingualism has become the only way of saying things, like in France, for example. They are changing too, so if the French can change, maybe we can do the same thing there. According to genealogy, in the case of Dalmatian, there were Dalmatian was part of the Italo-Dalmatian area, and as you've seen, Istrioto was part of the linguistic Romania too. Okay, so these two languages. The Dalmatian, unfortunately, has ceased to exist, but on that, like Venetian, which is very close, adjacent linguistically and typologically, because there's a linguistic continuum, okay? Catalan is very similar to Occitan. Occitan is very similar to Piedmontese. Piedmontese is very similar to Lombard. Lombard is very similar to Venetian. It is a chain, but Venetian is not very similar to Catalan or to Occitan because it's a matter of, you know, approximation of shades, okay? But in this case, also now, the people speak in Istrioto, which would be the language that also Dante recognized to be there. I think the Istrioto is not productive anymore. But Istroveneto, which is the Venetian imported somehow, or the Venetian, the local version of Venetian, somebody called it colonial Venetian, since Istria was part from centuries before of the, how can I say, of the Adriatic Romania, okay? This language, this similar language, kind of took place, is kind of a parthenogenesis, okay? Something that is rooted, some similar plant, it's a symbiosis, some similar plant, when it's dying, it can use its energies to alimentare, non mi viene un termine, to feed, yeah, exactly. To feed another similar language. This couldn't happen with German, for example, on Istrioto, because there would be no contact. But similarity can kind of turn this, take this language and become hair. All this, framework to say that, in my opinion, we can say that the Veneto-Dalmata, Dalmatian-Venetian, which is not Dalmatian per se, okay, Dalmatian-Venetian could be autochthonous, kind of not by its own substance, but by inheritance, okay, because it took the place of what was there before, which is closely related. It's like twins, you know, similar enough, but still different. It's That's my opinion, but I'm not sure of that, because this question is very complex, because you have to take many things.
Okay,
what is your opinion?
Oh my God, okay. So I'm going to give a twist to this. So, as we have to put the language in a cultural context,
Yeah.
maybe the question if Veneto is autochthon to Istria, we should say yes, most definitely, because even today, the strength of the community and self-identification of people from Istria using Veneto, even developing it in the sense of the cultural aspect. But the residue of language that you can find in Zadar and Split, Zara is Palato, I would still go with yes, in the sense of not maybe, as you said, it's not alive in a classical way anymore, but even the young people living in Dalmatia use it without knowing. So it's a part of living day, let's say, something like that.
Yeah, it's
so even if you don't have the awareness that you are using Veneto, you are using it.
But you're using terms, which is like using terms are not enough. You have to build up the language linguistically. The language must have all the 4 pillars. So you must have to be able to build up a sentence in that language to keep it to still name it as a language and not just a lexical contribution to another language. I don't know if I was clear or not.
That's why I said the cultural twist.
Yeah,
maybe
exactly.
It's not the question about, as I said, the autochthonity of Veneto in Dalmatia, but most definitely if we remove ourselves from the language directly, the Veneto culture is autochthon.
It became
to Dalmatia.
Yeah. Well, in this case, I'm rather sure about this. I would go perfectly with it. I wouldn't have the concerns of the linguists because we moved them out from the field of validity of this proposition. So yes, that I'm perfectly fine with this. Also, just another comparison, in Brazil, it is the same thing. Venetian words in Brazil entered in Standard Brazilian in the not only local Brazilian Portuguese, but also Standard Brazilian because of these many people, these 30 million people. You know, Bolsonaro was of Venetian origin, the former president of Brazil. I don't know what you think about him. That is not the question of today, but he was of Venetian origin. So if a Venetian could become president of the Federation of Brazil to 220 million people, well, of course, there is something cultural going on, and that is, I can say, certified. Okay. There's also a lot of cultural and linguistic in this sense, in this vein, in Italian. So many Italian words you think are Italian, they are not. Like ciao, they are Venetian. But Italian took them and maybe it popularized them through the use of in Italian language. For example, the term giocattolo. Giocattolo, which means toy, is a Venetian word, giocattolo, because in Italian they would use balocco, which is a completely different term, but now it is present only in dictionaries. Everybody uses the Venetian term, but Italians don't know. Okay, so culture is very broad, and since our appetite is so multilingual, multicultural, multi-everything, we are broadening our ability to incorporate these things, these multiple inputs. But my opinion is that it is even more autochthonous because what I tried to demonstrate, the core of this presentation, are that these areas from Veneto to Croatia, to I think also Austria to an extent, we developed a habit to do this, that others are learning only now. That is, so even more cultural. Maybe like epigenetic, you know. It's so much in our DNA, historical DNA, not personal, of course, but cultural DNA, that we started doing this normally and letting others learn it to do that.
Thank you. Just to finish my comment, I would say that Fiorentino is not autochthon to Veneto.
I agree. completely.
Yeah, I presume so. Thanks.
My grandma married with my grandpa in Vancouver. The thing that you've seen before, all these areas, also Canada, Australia, were painted with lighter blue, if you remember the world map, because Venetia are also there. I was in September, last September, I was in Melbourne, using part of these images to in the Veneto Club with the Venetian lion and the gondola outside in Melbourne. It happened to do the same thing in Vancouver, where my grandpa and my grandma married in 1958. They came back after, just 4 years afterwards. My grandma, who's now 91, she would speak more words in English than in Italian. And she lived for 87 years in Italy, in Veneto, in Italy, with the Italian language on the television, etc., and 4 years in Canada, of course, Vancouver, they speak English there. And still, she prefers to use English terms, and she doesn't use Italian terms. She uses them only to write the list or to go to the grocery, okay? And it's a funny thing that then I'm getting close for my... I don't know how to say it in English, il finocchio, the vegetable. Fennel, yeah. And which is, in Italian is finocchio. And in Venetian is fenocchio. Because what Italian is occhio, we say occhio. Okay? Maybe you've heard occhio, which means eye. Okay? And so when she writes the glossary list, she wrote the grocery list, she would say fenocchi, finocchio. Okay, so she would pronounce it and say it in Venetian, but since at school we were taught only to write Italian, of course we think that it is something inferior. But we are teaching Venetian now in schools too, even though there's no law. The Venetian way is you just do it. And so we did it in the last 5 years, more than 700 people, pupils of 11, 12, 13 years, are studying Venetian in little projects to let them produce also written forms of Venetian. So even it's never too late. Also maybe for Dalmatian. We can, Venetian Dalmatian or Dalmatian too, we can take it out from a drawer sometimes, if we want. That's just the will, is the basis of everything.
I had a comment, but I didn't want to interrupt you. I think that we all know that oči means eyes for a quite interesting, different reason. In Croatian, it's also oči. Yeah.
See? Yeah, also in Russian. The famous song Oči Černije.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, it's in the western parts nearing Ukraine use your oči, and the standard Russian is... No. I thought that somebody was whispering to me how it is. Okay. Do you any more questions?
If you have any questions in future, you can find some ways to contact us here. So that could be, we keep answering questions also for PhD candidates or postdoctoral researchers or graduates, because we keep receiving questions and requests for interview for any field, because you see it's quite broad, quite a broad thing. This Venetian phenomenon. And okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, Alessandro, one more time. And
grazie. Grazie in Venetian. Grazie.
And I would like to take the opportunity to tell you again about the snacks we have there. Feel free to take whatever you like, and teeny bit flags that we organized for this occasion. They're not of the best quality, but they might be a nice souvenir to have. So feel free to take them.
Thank you again.